His hunger for higher ethics has been expressed in his desire to erase the false red lines set up by the systems of control, the thirst to tear down barriers erected in order to divide people, to conquer them and control them. Because of hunger and thirst to tear down unjust social barriers among people, Jesus was eventually crucified. Welcome back to my channel. The fourth beatitude reads, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." This is the next stage in the process of paradigm change. So, first, after a poor in spirit accepts that he or she knows nothing and opens up to the process of changing their way of thinking, and second, they cry over the fact that life cannot be controlled and that they did not remain innocent in trying to find their place on the ladder of this hierarchical system of control, and three, in meekness agrees to put his or her will aside and surrender to God's will, then the process of paradigm change begins to penetrate their reality and start bringing concrete changes. The spiritual cast of God's will begins to redirect our self-bound will, and concrete signs of blessings begin to appear. The life begins to flourish, which is precisely what Jesus is trying to convey in Beatitudes, the flourishing of life. And the first sign of this flourishing is the development of a completely novel appetite for justice. When human will is attached to the cast of God's will, the first thing a person learns are the most basic red lines that define evil. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, these red lines are called the law of God, the Decalogue or the Ten Commandments, with their elaboration in the 5 books of Moses, in all those laws that are written there. These red lines have several functions. First, they teach people who are self-absorbed that they are not alone in this universe, but that there are 2 other realities beside them, divine and human, and that he or she should curb the arrogance of their self-bound will. Therefore, the first purpose is to socialize a person, civilize him or her, to teach them that their freedom is not absolute, that they should also respect the freedom of others. Secondly, these red lines also help a person to understand how far this zone of personal safety stretches and from where the danger zone begins. Both God and other people are free beings also, who do not like trespassing. Therefore, our freedom and our right to choose for ourselves are not absolute. They end where other people's freedom and right to choose begin. The role of law is to guarantee everyone's right to freedom by determining the most basic rules of behavior within the group, within the society, within this realm. However, the Beatitude does not read, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for the law," but "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." And righteousness is a much broader and more complex concept than the law, which the righteousness includes justice as well. In legislature, justice happens when in the trial process, people do not pay attention only to the letter of the law, but also to all personal, social, and other circumstances. In everyday life, a righteous person is the one who, in addition to adhering to the highest moral principles, is also trying to be humane. And good illustration of this is Joseph, Mary's husband. The Gospels say that Joseph was a righteous man. That is why when he found out that his fiancée is pregnant out of wedlock, he planned to secretly break off the engagement. According to the law, according to the letter of the law of Moses, the verdict for such case, in such cases, is death by stoning. But Joseph was greater than the letter of the law. In application of the principle, he decided to break off the engagement, but in his righteousness, he tried to protect Mary's life and dignity. The law is simple, both to understand and to implement. Justice is not simple. It's more complex because in addition to the letter of the law, it also includes humanness and goodwill towards others. That is, it is concerned with things the legal system is unable to command or regulate. From the perspective of the law, justice or righteousness is not mandatory, but a matter of personal choice. And that is why some believe that justice is a dangerous category because it is not constant. The results of its processes are unpredictable, and it can potentially invalidate the law, the letter of the law. Righteousness or justice is a higher ethics than the law. And the person in this stage of paradigm shift begins to develop an appetite for this higher ethics, which is not based only on legal duty or the letter of the law, but on the individual's decision as to what kind of person he or she will be, even when the law legally allows him or her to harm another person. So here, justice is not portrayed as a moralistic guilt, but rather as a longing of a person to be something more than what he or she currently is and what he or she is legally required to be. It's portrayed as a longing for a more humane version of themselves. And for that, people will need a paradigm shift. This longing for higher ethics manifests itself on two levels. The first is personal. When metanoia or paradigm shift takes root, the innate potential for the image of God is activated in a person. Christ's higher ethics ignites the essential part in us that makes us humane. This revives the hope that there is a world or a kingdom that matches our potential for love, connection, and communion. This hope creates a new appetite, hunger and thirst for righteousness, because we did not develop those potentials by living in this world, in these systems. A person going through the paradigm shift realizes that there is a part in him or her that resists the paradigm shift. In Romans 7, Apostle Paul says that there are two laws in him. The first is God's law, the spiritual cast that awakens God's image in us. That law we have consciously accepted, and we use our will to say, "Thy will be done." And the second law is the law of the flesh, the law of homo incurvatus, of a person who is self-absorbed, the law that says, "My will be done." Those two laws or principles are in mutual conflict, and Apostle's conclusion is that due to deep-rootedness of the habits of the flesh, the law of the flesh is stronger than our own willpower. Because regardless of our willingness to change and do good, Paul still does evil due to inertia of the body and its habits, which no longer agree with his soul, with his way of thinking. In other words, a person is not able to leave his old ways of thinking and make a paradigm shift by his own willpower. And that is precisely what is necessary for the flourishing to happen. Therefore, what we have here is a deadlock. The paradigm shift becomes impossible, because what is absolutely necessary for a person to flourish, he or she is unable to achieve. This deadlock creates a split in a person between what we want to do and what we are actually doing, or what we are actually capable of doing, which leads to inner conflict. So Solzhenitsyn noted that the dividing line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And cynically, he asks the question, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? This question is crucial. Who will destroy a part of themselves? That's why there aren't many who understand Christianity from the perspective of paradigm shift, and why there are countless masses who understand it from the perspective of dogmatics or rituals. Because dogmatics and rituals are cheap. They do not require cutting off any part of ourselves, only money and some time, wasted time. Paul ends up asking a similar question to Solzhenitsyn. O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Asks Paul. The hunger for righteousness that Jesus talks about consists of hope and willingness on the one hand, and sabotage of parts of our own heart on the other. From the outside, this may look like a mental problem or depression, but it is not. It is the hunger for a new, higher ethics, the hope and longing for a new order based on connection, vulnerability, and love, while at the same time the old law of self-bound will does not allow us to fly home, to go in that direction. So this is personal level of hunger and thirst for righteousness. The second level is social. Jesus' conversation with the Samaritan woman illustrates this aspect very well. Relations between Jews and Samaritans were reduced to racial, national, and religious chauvinism. The Jews considered the Samaritans to be deranged because they were a mix of Jews and Gentiles, and they considered their religion a syncretistic heresy. And for Samaritan women, rabbis taught that they are menstruating from birth and therefore were permanently unclean. A virtuous Jew who cared about his reputation was not allowed to even look in her direction. And on the other hand, Samaritans did not remain neutral. Jews usually avoided traveling through Samaria because they were physically attacked by Samaritans. This was the social norm, the red lines of the political and religious systems of control on both sides. Nevertheless, Jesus steps into this situation. He came to Samaritan soil and not only looks in the direction of Samaritan woman, but he takes time to have the longest conversation with an individual ever recorded in the New Testament. Asking her to help him with a drink, he treats her with dignity. At the same time, he defiles himself because he was not supposed to drink from the unclean water skins of the Gentiles. He crosses all social norms because those are the false red lines that divide sexes, religions, and nations. He also violates the purity laws. And when the disciples have returned and urged him to eat, Jesus answered them very mystically, I have food to eat of which you do not know. My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. It is possible to understand this statement only from the perspective of the Beatitudes and the paradigm shift. His hunger for higher ethics has been expressed in his desire to erase the false red lines set up by the systems of control, the thirst to tear down barriers erected in order to divide people, to conquer them and control them. Because of hunger and thirst to tear down unjust social barriers among people, Jesus was eventually crucified. Why are people like this? Pulled apart internally between two ethics and externally between two kingdoms. Because the life of such people turns into a vector, into a directed force that begins to push them outside the scope of predictability of the status quo that systems of control promotes. By being stretched between two ethics and two realms, a life of a person who goes through a paradigm shift becomes a tightening string that now can make a sound. Without the awakening of the human potential for God's likeness in us, and without the frustration of that potential by the systems of control and the old law of the flesh, neither poetry nor art nor any other creative thought would be possible in this world. Without that tension, there will be no need for divine help to build up our potential. There will be no faith and no journey. They're blessed. These people are blessed because when this hunger for the impossible is activated, suddenly everything becomes possible. The only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. That's what Arthur C. Clarke said. It is important to go above and beyond what we have been told is possible. And that is paradigm shift, basically. Because it might be that those limits are false limits and were set up by the systems of control, not by God. Going beyond creates longing, which becomes a witness to the presence of higher realities in this inhumane world, and a seed of hope for the dormant potential for God's likeness in other people. Blessed are those who feel in themselves and around them the resistance to their longing for righteousness and justice, to recognize and protect the dignity of every human being, and who, in the name of love and freedom, jump over racial, educational, national, religious, economic, political, and other barriers. Blessed are they because they are ready for the unstoppable future. One does not enter the kingdom of God as a male or female, rich or poor, Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Hindu, or Buddhist, but we enter as human beings. And to be a human being in this world means to hunger and thirst for justice, for humanness in one's own life and then in society. And that cannot be commanded. This path is chosen. Those who choose this path must know that they will be hungry, that this longing will be frustrated both on the inside and on the outside, but they will also be aimed. They will be shot like an arrow towards a target that cannot be seen, but is somehow sensed in their hearts and bones. And while they travel, their life produces a melody that awakens hope everywhere they pass through.